This week on the PRESSURECAST, Shenmue 3 has weird faces, Xbox One X pre-orders sell out, and Half-Life fans finally get closure. Kind of. It's Monday, August 28th, 2017. Everything happening in the world of video games is here, now, on the PRESSURECAST. Hey, Pressure Pals, welcome to the 196th episode of the PRESSURECAST, VideoGamesAreDumb.com's weekly news panic that posts every single Monday on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, TuneIn Radio, Google Play Music, and a bunch of other places. If you're looking for the audio or video version of this episode, you can check the description of this YouTube video or in your podcast app. And boy, oh boy, what a show we have for you today. We're going to be talking all about the latest news from Gamescom and the hype train. We've got early reports of Xbox One X pre-orders and Nintendo Switch launch window sales in the chart park, and then of course we're going to be closing up the show celebrating the anniversaries in video games in strong history. But let's not forget, this is episode 196, which means we're only 4 episodes away from episode 200 and permanent cancellation. Why is the show getting canceled? Because the ratings are terrible. In fact, the last episode of the PRESSURECAST failed to get 100 views on YouTube with the average viewer duration of 17 minutes, which is actually pretty good as far as YouTube goes, but it's a 90-minute show. So enjoy it while you got it. Why am I bringing this up? Just because I want everyone to understand why the show is getting canceled. But now that I've shared my own depressing existence, let's move on to the brighter side. Each and every week I ask you, dear listener and viewer, to respond to my question related to video games. It's a little something we like to call, Tell Me, Goddammit! Last week, we were talking about Sonic Mania. Some were calling it the first good Sonic game in over 20 years. And so I asked you, dear listener and viewer, which franchise needs a Sonic Mania? You know, a series that's fallen from grace and you'd like to see make a triumphant return. Well, Joe was the first to respond, and here's what he said. He said, a series that needs a return to form, I unfortunately have to say, is Final Fantasy. While I haven't actually hated the games they've been putting out the last decade, they've been disappointing for long-term fans of the series. The characters and narrative have just been off for some time now. I thought Final Fantasy 15 had some good ideas in it, but my god, it was unevenly paced, which is a huge detriment to the overall experience. Very good answer, Joe. And you know what? I absolutely have to agree with you there. I can't help but feel that Final Fantasy has lost something, and I feel that a lot of this has to do with budgets. It seems impossible, but only back between 1990 and the year 2000, we got 6 amazing Final Fantasy games. We got Final Fantasy 3 through Final Fantasy 9 between 1990 and the year 2000. In just a decade, 6 of the greatest games of all time with completely different characters and worlds and system, all of which hold up remarkably well. Except for Part 8. Well, whatever, it's a toss-up, but each of those games were incredible, and they were all released in under a decade. Now, take a look at Final Fantasy 10 through 15. It's taken them 15 years between 2001 and 2016, and 2 of those games were MMOs. Do those really count? I'm not really convinced. But that's not to say that there haven't been more Final Fantasy games. In fact, some would say that there's been too many Final Fantasy games, because Final Fantasy 7, 4, 10, and 13 have all received sequels, prequels, and side stories, which kind of breaks the point of Final Fantasy. And that's not even taking into account all of the remakes on handhelds and phones, or the numerous spin-offs like Curtain Call and Destaya, the fighting game. So what went wrong? Well, for me personally, it was the lack of finality. Pun intended. Beyond Final Fantasy 2, the games prior to 10 were self-contained stories, which was more than fine because each game was around 80 hours long. You got a complete tale. It was good. But making all of those locations and character designs is expensive, and to recoup those costs, Squaresoft eventually caved in and started offering additional games for each world. Actually, now that I say that, it's been going on for so long that I'm not even sure most younger players are even aware of what Final Fantasy used to be. And if you are one of those younger players, let me just say, Final Fantasy was a brief glimpse into a different world. And that was it. It was over. When Final Fantasy 7, you saw the credits roll, you knew that was it. There was no more Final Fantasy. They were moving on to an entirely different world. Those characters are gone. You will not see them again. It's over. And that's what made you savor every second. Even Part 8, which I just talked smack about. It's sad that that era is gone, but, you know, it is. And today, I don't even know what to call Final Fantasy. I mean, I know it's an RPG series, but what makes Final Fantasy different than any other franchise? They just keep re-releasing the same games. And even the director, Hajime Tabata, said that there's more to come in the Final Fantasy 15 universe. Great. Thanks for that. I was just clamoring for more there. Anyway, thank you. Good answer. Let's move on to James, who chimed in with his own response, saying that games that need a reboot that come to mind are Turok, SSX, and Time Splitters. Now, this is Tell Me Goddammit, which is a segment that's all about having dreams come true. So we don't limit answers based on reality. Whatever your heart desires, that's the right answer, at least in my opinion. But at least in terms of reality, I can understand why they aren't making more Turok games, because Iguana Entertainment and Propaganda Games, those were the two developers behind the franchise, both of which have shut down. So I understand that. Makes sense. As for Free Radical, the people that made Time Splitters, they shut down 3 years ago. So that's why there's no more Time Splitters. I understand. It makes sense. But like I said, of course, this is Tell Me Goddammit, this is where dreams come true, so answer however you want. But the reason I mention all that other stuff is because look at SSX. Look at EA. They're still around. So is EA Canada. And I know they brought it back like 5 years ago on the PlayStation 3 and 360, and that was pretty dang good. But why haven't we seen another SSX this generation? I know that the last game didn't have local multiplayer, and that was a sticking point for some people, but it was a really solid snowboarding game. And I know some people will point out that, hey, look at what happened to Ubisoft. They released Steep last year, and that didn't do so hot. Well, I think there's more to it than just, that being a skiing and snowboarding game. First of all, it's called Steep, which isn't a good name. Second of all, it was released in December, which December, you can release a game in December. I don't know if you can release a snowboarding game in December. I know it sounds funny because, of course, it's a very snowy time of year, but I just don't think that... I don't know. I imagine August to October is when you would sell a snowboarding game. That's just my gut feeling. So EA, get back on track, get a good soundtrack going, bring back the Run DMC, and let's get another SSX going. That would be awesome. And finally, TEG Hunt says... Here's his answer. Metal Gear needs a return to form, but without Kojima, it ain't gonna happen. Realistically though, we could do with a good new Spider-Man. Well, the good news is that, of course, there is a new Spider-Man game that's being made by Insomniac Games, and it's actually demoing really well. The current previews on this Spider-Man game have all been positive, so that's good news. But you're right. Metal Gear simply can't exist without Kojima. I mean, who else could get away with making Metal Gear Solid 2, a game that essentially trolls the fans, and the fans love it? Or who else can make hour-long cutscenes and get the fans to love it? Or who else can make 3 games based off of a franchise that already exists, like 3 different prequels that take place 40 to 50 years ago, all revolving around Cold War era conspiracy theories, and get the fans to love it? Only Kojima, because the fact is, Metal Gear has always been about the director and writer Hideo Kojima. So as far as I'm concerned, even though he's not working on Metal Gear will continue. He's making that brand new game, Death Stranding. It's going to be basically the next spiritual successor of Metal Gear, because all of his experiences, all of his hobbies, he crams into his next game. So Death Stranding looks like it's about his experience of being pushed out of Konami. And if it's a great game, we wouldn't get it unless Kojima got kicked out of Konami, which is also kind of good news. And I know that it bears little resemblance to Metal Gear. Well, neither did an open world game like Phantom Pain, but as soon as Phantom Pain came out, heck yeah, it fit right in. So as far as I'm concerned, Metal Gear lives, just not at Konami. And Konami's going to learn that when they release Metal Gear Survive, which looks not great. Well, that's all the responses we got this week, but of course I have a new question for you, dear listener and viewer. We're actually going to be talking about the brand new Fist of the North Star video game in just a moment, which of course is based on a pre-established anime license. And now there's even rumors that Bethesda is developing a brand new Game of Thrones title. Now, I think we can all agree that licensed games have a less than stellar reputation, but this is where dreams come true. This is Tell Me Goddammit. You just speak from the heart, okay? Tell me, what is your personal favorite licensed game of all time? Or, if you don't have one, what would be a license you'd like to see adapted into a video game? Like I said, this is where dreams come true. It doesn't matter what the license. It doesn't matter if it would be impossible to get. It doesn't matter if the developer doesn't exist anymore. Bring it all together. If you could get a licensed game based off of something other than video games, and you have a developer in mind, just name it, and it'll be great. You know why it'll be great? Because this is all in our imaginations. So just think of it. Wow. Awesome. Anyway, I will check your responses, and oh yeah, I should mention that you can actually answer the question. Check the description of this episode or your podcast app. You'll find the email address, you'll find the phone number where you can text or leave a voicemail. It is just a voicemail box. Don't worry, no one's going to pick up the phone. You can tweet, or you can even leave a comment on this YouTube video, and I will read your answers next week. So tell me, goddammit, Oh man, I feel like every week I'm forgetting to answer my own question. So what I meant to say earlier was the one game that really needs to get back on track is not this week. I want to answer the question. The one franchise I believe really needs to get on track is I heard toots. Don't interrupt me this week. I just want to answer the question because the one franchise that needs to get back on track is all right, fine. It's the hype train. Feel the PR vibrations as we barrel towards video game satisfaction station on the hype train. Jerk of a train. Well, this is the part of the show where we talk about the upcoming video games to get you hyped up to spend all your money and become a video game guru. And we're going to start off this week's hype train by talking about the recent Yakuza live stream, which contained some surprises. If you didn't see the leaks in advance. Well, earlier this week on the PlayStation Network store, a page was created for Yakuza Kiwami 2, a remake of the second Yakuza game on the PlayStation 4 using the new engine from Yakuza 6. Now, Yakuza 2 was originally released in 2006 on the PlayStation 2 in Japan, and then 2008 in America, and its late release on the PlayStation 2 in the West has, made it a very rare game, even though I have a copy. Because I love Yakuza. Now, before you get too excited, Sega has yet to announce a Western release date for Yakuza Kiwami 2, though it will be available in Japan later this year on December 7th. In related news, the remake of Yakuza 1, Yakuza Kiwami, will be released in America tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow, August 29th on the PlayStation 4. We actually have one more Yakuza-related story, but before we get on to that, I think it's worth pointing out the timing of this announcement. I mean, just look at it. Yakuza Kiwami is going to be out in the West tomorrow, and Sega just happens to announce its sequel, even though it's a remake. It's still a sequel, because it's Yakuza 2. There's no way that's a coincidence. Like, none. See, I mentioned before that Yakuza's fan base is hardcore, right? They keep up with every single announcement that comes out of Japan, even though there are Yakuza games that still haven't come to America. Like, there's the ones that take place in feudal Japan, there's at least 2 PSP spin-offs, and there's the Wii U port of Yakuza HD 1 and 2. That was on the Wii U, never came to America, and yet the fan base keeps up with every bit of news. So if I had to guess, this is Sega's way of telling fans, hey, maybe go out and buy a copy of Kiwami. And if you do that, you'll get this follow-up, which, by the way, Yakuza Kiwami is only $30. And I assume the reason they're releasing a discount title is because they're trying to pull in that wider audience. Because once you play Yakuza, you stick with it. It's an amazing franchise. And in case you have no idea what Yakuza is, imagine a JRPG where the random battles are beat-em-up street brawler stages. It's one of my favorite franchises. Heck, I'm actually going to buy a copy of Kiwami tomorrow, even though I won't have time to play it until December, because it's going to be the fall lineup. I'm still buying a copy because I love Yakuza. But before we move on, there was another Yakuza-related announcement. Sega revealed that they're releasing a new Yakuza series called Yakuza Online. Now, lower those expectations. Trust me, you'll want to, because this game is going to be released on PC, which is good news, and smartphones. Now, nothing against PCs, but smartphones, you know what kind of game you're getting. You just do. Also, Yakuza Online will be free to play with microtransactions, and there'll be a brand new protagonist whose name is Ichiban Kasuga. He's a 40-year-old Yakuza returned to Kamurocho after a 17-year stint in prison, which sounds a lot like the protagonist from the regular Yakuza series, even though he has an afro. This new character, I should say. Also, he's going to be presumably working his way up in the Japanese mafia when the game launches sometime in 2018. Now, I've already seen more than a few cynical takes regarding Yakuza Online, and yeah, I'm not particularly thrilled to see this, but it's worth pointing out, this is the Japanese market. This is what keeps a lot of those big-time publishers going. This is what keeps their quarterly reports strong, so even if I don't want to play it, it's a completely logical step for Sega to take, even though it sounds really lame. Anyway, toot toot, but the biggest and most unexpected announcement during the Sega livestream was the reveal of a brand new Fist of the North Star video game, also being developed by the team behind the Yakuza series. Now, little is known about the project beyond its 2018 release date, but during the trailer, the hero, boy, you're gonna kill me because I never know how to pronounce this guy's name, Kenshiro? We'll go with Kenshiro. I always thought that's how you said it, but I've watched a lot of anime where they mispronounce things, so who knows? Well, anyway, Kenshiro is seen working as a part-time bartender, making martinis, Now, considering that the anime and manga is mostly centered around lethal beatdowns in the middle of a post-apocalyptic world, it's safe to assume that the developer is going to be taking plenty of liberties. Now, this is far from the first time that Fist of the North Star has been adapted into a video game. In fact, the first adaptation was back on the Famicom back in 1986, and since then it's seen dozens upon dozens of different games over the past 30 years. In related news, former WWE champion John Cena has said that his favorite anime is Fist of the North Star, though I suppose that's not related to this story at all. So, what we've seen of this game, what little we've seen of this game, because it's only about a minute-long trailer and there's barely any gameplay, there's bartending, and there's a dude getting punched in the face so much his head explodes. Now, half of that has something to do with Fist of the North Star, the punching bit, and the other half doesn't, the bartending bit, which is good news. And you might say, well, why is that good news? They're not being authentic to the franchise. Well, hear me out. The problem with a lot of these Fist games, which have mostly been terrible, they've mostly been terrible, is that, well, they just rely on the part where you run around and punch people. They take the series far too literally. They don't really work around it. They just have the bits where you're running around the street and you punch people, and that's cool at first because it looks really awesome, but it gets bland after a couple of hours. Now, take a look at Yakuza. It's basically the same idea. You run around and you punch a lot of people, but you're punching people on the way to actually do something, like recovering a stolen video game or babysitting. Yakuza is really weird, but the point is it strikes a really compelling balance between vibrant action and entertaining side activities. So this trailer would probably leave a non-fan confused, but if you're hip to what Yakuza is and what Fist of the North Star is, which I'll be honest, I only saw the movie like 30 years ago, this looks pretty good. This looks pretty good. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully it comes to America. Hopefully. I mean, John Cena loves it. It has to, right? Okay. Toot toot. And now we return to the story I've been following since 3 generations ago. Yes, console generations. Or is it 2 console generations? I can never place where the Dreamcast is. But either way, we've got even more Shenmue 3 news thanks to its recent outing at the Gamescom event in Germany. YSNet, which is Yu Suzuki Net, it's his company, they released the very first official trailer since the game began production over 2.5 years ago, or 16 years ago, depends how you look at it. Anyway, the trailer showed a few familiar locations and characters from Shenmue 2, which I'm not going to mention here because if I do, I might be spoiling Shenmue 2 for you because maybe you want to play that because these games are going to be connected, so I'm not going to mention major spoilers, we're just going to move on. But one detail, above all else, appeared to rub some people the wrong way. And that was, much like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, the faces, or more specifically, the lack of expression on the faces. Yes, the character models that were used in the trailer featured unblinking eyes and unexpressive looks. However, according to director and visionary and the greatest man of all time, Yu Suzuki, I'm sorry, that was a bit of editorializing right there. Well, according to Yu Suzuki, he was speaking with GameSpark. He said, quote, facial expressions were implemented a month ago, but were temporarily removed, end quote. Yes, that's really the whole news story. This was actually a pretty big news story. Shenmue 3 faces. And to be honest, I watched the trailer before the controversy brewed, and I didn't really notice the faces because that sort of, I don't know, it looked like Shenmue to me. Seriously, Shenmue is one of my favorite games of all time, probably in my top 5, but even I can admit the majority of facial expressions came down to moving eyebrows, kind of like a Muppet. Just go back. Whenever Ryo is mad, his eyebrows just kind of go together, and whenever he's happy, his eyebrows go up. I don't know. And here's the thing. I absolutely cannot be objective about Shenmue. Like, even acknowledging those flaws, I immediately became defensive once I saw people talking about the Shenmue 3 trailer. Like, I was like, leave it alone, man. It's just not for you. Like, I became one of those fans for like 5 minutes. But I can recognize that if I wasn't this deeply, personally, completely consumed and invested in the idea of Shenmue 3, I probably would have noticed how bad the faces looked. Because, yeah, they didn't move around. But if I can take another step back, or at least attempt one, we don't really have a reference for this. See, this is a fully 3D open world game made on Kickstarter. That's kind of new. Also, it's a planned sequel of a 17-year-old game, as in this game was planned around the limits of the Sega Dreamcast before Sega pulled the plug. And if not the Sega Dreamcast, then maybe the original Xbox at most. Do you really want fans, or do fans really expect a modern video game out of this, or do they want what Shenmue 3 was supposed to be, like an unaltered vision? Like, me personally, I would be happy if they just released this on the Dreamcast or the original Xbox. I wouldn't care. Like, I want it to be as accurate as the original game because I think the original Shenmue 1 and 2 hold up really well. Now, that said, this was already kind of an issue of implementation. Like, they had the facial animations done. Why would they pull them out before making this trailer? I think that's silly. But I think this is, I think this game, Shenmue 3, is an example of revisionist preservation game history, if that makes any sense. Like, trying to take a game that was done in concept and then bring it to fruition through modern development. It's weird, it's something totally different, and I'm being a total Shenmue fanboy. God damn it. Toot toot. Hey, remember that leak last week we were talking about? You know, the THQ open world game called Biomutant, the game with the raccoon cat thing that had a big sword and whatnot? Well, THQ has officially revealed the game at Gamescom, and the developers known as Experiment 101 have compared it to other popular classics such as Metroid. So in Biomutant, yes, you're going to be playing as a raccoon that will progressively unlock new abilities as he fights different creatures. Now, the raccoon will wield a combination of guns and striking weapons as he dodges and attacks. I'm sorry, I can't hide that I'm not very excited about this game. They also have cartoon-like words like snark that fly up whenever you make contact, kind of like Comic Zone or Mad World. Okay, I don't want to be a jerk, especially because this game isn't out yet and we just learned about it over the past 2 weeks. But I've been looking at Biomutant and I've been checking out the gameplay demos and I don't know who this game is for. Like, I'm not trying to be mean about it. I've kept up with video game sales long enough to recognize when something isn't for me, but will probably sell well. Like, I understand that there are things out there that just, regardless of my opinion, will do well. But I look at Biomutants and I think, really? Who are you making this for? So without trying to seem like a complete asshole, I just feel that this game is going to be a mild success in Europe and it will bomb in America and Japan. And I only say the UK because the UK has like a certain type of flavor of game that's existed since like the ZX Spectrum. They're more favorable when it comes to mascots. But when I see this tough looking mammal bouncing on mushrooms in a jungle and shooting guns and having swords and little comic book stuff, that all seems like a bit too, you know, kiddie for adults. And it's not colorful enough for kids. It's not colorful enough for kids because they, I don't know, it just looks grimy. It looks like Crysis 3, but with like a raccoon. Like I said, I don't know who this game is for. And for the record, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that this is clearly just a game that I don't understand that other people will be into, because the industry needs more creative risk like this. Seriously, we need more creative risks, especially in the AAA space. But if Enslaved couldn't pull this off, how is Biomutant going to? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Toot toot. So, how's this for a transition? We were just discussing a popular game held back by its subject matter, and now we're going to move on to an unpopular genre that's boosted by its subject matter. Yes, we're going to be talking about the fighting game Injustice 2, which is an awesome game. You can check out my review at youtube.com/videogamesardumb. Please do it. It's a good review. But this game is obviously only popular because it has Batman in it. Be honest with yourself. You know it's true. My nose is itchy today, so I keep trying to scratch it while I'm doing the podcast. I'm sorry about that. Well, NetherRealm Studios has announced 3 brand new characters that are going to be coming with the upcoming Fighter Pack 2. First off, we've got Black Manta, who's an Aquaman villain. And if you're thinking that Black Manta, that guy sounds like a wuss because he's an Aquaman villain, first of all, you don't know how powerful Aquaman is. Aquaman is crazy powerful. And second of all, Black Manta is straight up evil. I'm talking child murdering evil. Do not mess with Black Manta. He's the real deal. Now up next we have Raiden from the Mortal Kombat series. This of course is the God of Thunder. And I'm just going to say it right now, if he's the God of Thunder, he better have a cool opening line when he fights Black Adam, because Black Adam also is a god of sorts of thunder, even though the thunder Black Adam wields is technically magic. Just saying there, folks. And finally, we have the Hellspawn, known as Hellboy, who will be the first character in Injustice 2 that's unrelated to NetherRealms or DC Comics. Hellboy is in fact published by Dark Horse Comics, which can only mean one thing: we're getting the mask in the next pack. Maybe. Anyway, Black Manta was virtually a given. They've been dropping hints that he'd be included in the game since it launched. And Raiden is awesome, but no surprise there because, you know, NetherRealm Studios, what do you expect? They already put Sub-Zero in the game. However, Hellboy is fucking awesome, especially if you watch the trailer. He's totally angular like he is in the comic books rather than the movies. And if NetherRealms can really get into other comic book characters outside the DC universe, well, that's awesome. But it made me think for a second, what are the chances that we'll get some smaller publication characters that are actually owned by DC? Like, what about Guy? He's a Grant Morrison character. That'd be really cool. Or how about The Question, the Steve Ditko character? That would be amazing. You got Preacher, who is, God, I forget his name, Ellis? I can't remember his name right now. Like, I know Hellboy is big because he got a couple of major films under his belt, but can we get a little bit more absurd? And here's the real question that I'm sure will make comic book fans really pissed off. But think about this. How long do you think it'll be before we get the Watchmen in Injustice 3? You know it's going to happen sooner or later. Don't deny it. There have already been Watchmen games. They aren't good. Toot toot. Anyway, when the SNES Classic was announced, one of the games that people were most excited about, well, besides Star Fox 2, was the classic 1993 action RPG Secret of Mana, which was published by Squaresoft in 1993. Well, the good news is you don't need to own an SNES Classic to play this on a new console. How exciting is that? Square Enix has announced a 3D remake of Secret of Mana for the PlayStation 4, Vita, and PC. The game will be identical to the original, though the world and characters will be rendered in fancy new polygons as opposed to sprites. You can already pre-order it on PlayStation Network. It's going to be coming to Steam soon, and it will be released on February 15th. Now, the response to this news was surprisingly chipper, even though normally curmudgeonly retro video game fans were like, yeah, cool, like seeing more Secret of Mana stuff. But allow me to take a moment to ruin the fun. Once again, just like Biomutant, I just want to ruin everybody's time. See, this game, how do I start? I don't even know how I want to say this. Last year, I played a game called Adventures of Mana on the Vita. It was a remake of the original Mana game, and then Secret of Mana, of course, was the sequel to that, you know, and it had 3D graphics. In fact, the art style for this remake looks identical to Adventures of Mana. By the way, Adventures of Mana was the second worst game I played in 2016, bar none. Or maybe it was the worst game. I can't remember what was number one last year. It was a real toss-up because I hated two games very much. Now, I acknowledge that there are differences between Adventures and Secret, because like Secret is like, you know, a little bit more turn-based rather than action-based, and Adventure was kind of like a Zelda clone. Plus, Adventures, at least the remake, was originally an iPhone game before it was ported over to the Vita. But the quality of that remake was so piss poor, I can't help but, you know, keep my expectations at rock bottom. And if you don't believe me, just go look up footage of Adventures of Mana. It's really bad. Horrible. So, yeah. Sorry to ruin the fun. Toot toot. Speaking of remakes, here's one I didn't expect to see. Do I call this a classic or not? I don't know. It's an old game. Well, it's a video game from the year 2000. We'll be making a jump to current gen, and it's none other than the PlayStation 1 title Fear Effect. Do you remember Fear Effect? Maybe. The original game heavily resembled the Resident Evil franchise with fixed camera angles and an awkward challenge of early third-person shooting. You know, you kind of just swing around a little bit. It was really weird. However, Square Enix claims this remake will see improved visuals and controls when it launches on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC sometime next year. Now, in case you don't remember, Fear Effect, I'm being a little too hard on it because it's not a bad game by any means, but beyond its visuals, which were cel-shaded, which was a big deal back in the day, there wasn't much to it. It's one of those early examples of the West attempting to replicate anime atmosphere, and it really shows. But it's like, I don't know. The first one at least is better than the sequel, because the sequel basically sold on the fact that the protagonist, who is a woman, sleeps with another woman. Wow. This was before internet porn got really big. What are you gonna do? But the biggest surprise for me about this is that this is actually a lead-in for a sequel. Yes, really, they're making a game called Fear Effect Sedna? Fear Effect Sedna? That's what they're gonna call it? That's not a good name. But that's gonna be coming out next year, and it's an isometric shooter-type game. Kind of looks like XCOM, but more action-centric, but whatever. If you have fond memories of early textures colliding, and that's not an innuendo, keep your eyes peeled for Fear Effect next year. Woo. Toot toot. Speaking of questionable second chances, the disastrous 2011 online first-person shooter Brink has officially made the transition to free-to-play. Now, Brink was originally released on the PlayStation 3, 360, and PC, and this Bethesda-published title is one of the first, or nope, not the first, one of the most anticipated games in its time due to its emphasis on parkour mobility in a first-person game. That was kind of original. But then it came out and it kind of sucked, just being honest. But here's a fun fact. The developer Splash Damage is still alive and well, and they most recently worked on Gears of War 4 last year. How cool is that? Anyway, I hate to use this old cliche, but too little too late. I mean, how many 6-year-old games have made a resurgence after going free to play? None. I'll go with none. Man, I'm being so negative this week, but it's true. A lot of these stories just don't embed much optimism for me. But if you're interested, it is free to play right now on Steam, but you won't get your time back, so think about it. Toot toot. Way back in the simpler days of 2016, Square Enix published a small indie game called Final Fantasy 15 on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. It was a different time. But what about the fan favorite, the personal computer system? Well, fret not, Windows users. Square Enix has announced Final Fantasy 15 will be coming to the platform sometime in 2018. No specific release date was given. As you would expect with a PC port, it will take advantage of brand new horsepower, offering enhanced visuals and 4K resolution. Woo. Now that's the whole story right there, which is by no means a surprise because director Hajime Tabata has been talking about a PC version of the game since last year. But if you're curious about Final Fantasy 15, you should go and watch my review at youtube.com/videogamesardumb and give myself a thumbs up and leave a comment, share the video as well. Yes, I include this story just to give myself a free plug. Go watch the review. Go watch the reviews. Share my videos. I want more viewers. Toot toot. It's hard to believe, but it's only been 5 months since the launch of Mass Effect Andromeda, which went real bad, with plenty of criticisms given to the game's awkward visual glitches resulting in dead-eyed characters and unsettling faces. Of course, there are some defenders of Andromeda, but you could say some of them are a bit too close to the matter. One of them is the executive vice president of the publisher of the game, Patrick Sunderland. He was actually speaking with Game Reactor, which is the #1 place to see the most reactor of games, and Sunderland expressed his disappointment in the disappointment of other people. Well, here's what he said. Quote, "I usually don't do this, but this is one of those places where I feel like the game got criticized a little more than it deserved. I think the game is actually a great game. Yes, we have to acknowledge the fact that there were some things that maybe we could have done better, absolutely. But as a whole, if you go in and you buy the game today with everything that's in it today, I believe that's a game worth buying personally." End quote. Did somebody say worth? Because I do a whole series of videos called Worth It at youtube.com/videogamesardumb, so you can go check that out right now. But let's talk about this for a moment. I kind of agree with Patrick Sunderland to a degree, to a certain degree. The internet has a really bad habit of attempting to pile on popular opinions, especially when they're negative, because it gets them upvotes or retweets or whatever makes them popular for 5 seconds. Even if the people that make those GIFs and screenshots never actually played the games themselves. And it's the easiest thing to mock in a video game are visual glitches, because you can just see it, you instantly know there's something wrong, and then it can just go viral. But for me, personally, just talking about Mass Effect Andromeda, the visuals were by no means the issue. Now, I personally experienced some weird glitches going on. There was a point where there were floating enemies attacking me that shouldn't have been floating. It was really weird. They were like standing in invisible towers. It was super strange. But altogether, that made up for less than 1% of my experience. I didn't care about the visuals. And I actually think in many cases they were really good. The problem with Andromeda is it's really boring. You can't patch that. You can't fix that. The story is dull, the characters are flat, and the pacing is glacier. That's not something that you can just drop a patch and resolve in a second. Now imagine, let me explain exactly why let me explain the scenario of Mass Effect Andromeda, and I think you'll understand if you've not played the game. Imagine traveling to a new galaxy. Humanity has left the galaxy, and they see a brand new species. First contact, humanity and this new species from a different galaxy are finally communicating, and they're immediately speaking English. Well, that's weird, but okay, we'll accept it. Maybe they have some sort of device that just automatically translates. And then 2 minutes later, you're in a side quest. That's first contact? No, what is your culture? What do you represent? Nothing? Just, whoa, I've never seen one of you guys before. Can you go over there and collect 3 crystals? What the fuck? That right there was the problem. Had nothing to do with graphics. Anyway, toot toot. Hey, remember the Bethesda from like 2 stories ago? Well, they're a publisher and developer that's still around, and they're branching out into the latest tech craze of virtual reality. Is virtual reality still the latest tech craze, or is that augmented reality? Or no, which reality is the most popular? Which one are we pivoting to? Anyway, back in E3 2016, no, yeah, 2016? Yes, Bethesda revealed Fallout VR at E3 2017, and we got our first look at Doom VFR and Skyrim VR back in E3 2017. But despite that gap in announcements, these games are going to be coming out in fairly rapid succession. Skyrim VR arrives on the PlayStation VR on November 17th this year, which is going to be a timed exclusive, presumably, while Doom VR is dropping on the PlayStation VR and the Vive on December 1st, and Fallout 4 VR arrives exclusively on the Vive on December 12th. Now, if you're interested at all, you might want to double check the latest developments, as I'm recording this while Gamescom is still going on. Oh, not just Gamescom, QuakeCon, which Bethesda is holding, so there might be more details if you're interested. I'm gonna be another negative Nancy, and I feel like an asshole, but I gotta respond to the news. I don't mean to be mean. That's a good way to start this off. I don't mean to be pessimistic. In fact, I'm really optimistic about video games. If I was always pessimistic, I would just find a new hobby. But all of these VR versions sound like terrible ideas. See, first off, you got the early impressions of Skyrim VR, because they've been doing a lot of demos. It has been dreadful. People are coming back saying it's too dark, it doesn't play right, the head tracking's off, it's bad. And you might think that has something to do with the PlayStation VR and the PlayStation 4, and I'll admit they are not ideal for this sort of thing, but if they aren't, why are you making it? Like, why is Bethesda making it? Do you know what I mean? In fact, now that I say it out loud, why are any of these games being made in VR? Like, honestly, why make any games that already exist into VR? And really think about this for a moment. We have a revolutionary piece of technology that was impossible 10 years ago. Consumer-ready virtual reality, complete with motion controls. Think about that for a moment. And what are we doing? We're re-releasing old games. Now imagine if the PS1 and the Nintendo 64 had come out, and the first thing developers did were like, oh, we need a 3D version of arcade games. We need a 3D version of Pac-Man. We need a 3D version of Street Fighter 2. Not a new Street Fighter. We need a 3D version of Street Fighter 2 or a 3D version of Super Mario World. Do you think that would have worked? I don't think so. I mean, sure, it would function, but what's the difference? What's the selling point? I'm not saying that we have to throw out game theory and game design altogether, but we need major, expensive messes. We need these ideas that are thrown at the wall and thrown at the wall and thrown at the wall, that are given enough time, and then they can be collected and polished and reinvent video games as we know it in virtual reality. And I know that's a tall order. Well, too bad, because it's virtual reality, and virtual reality costs money, and you can't just shackle VR to the concepts of the past. It doesn't make any sense. We don't need Fallout 4 in VR. We need a moment like we have with Mario 64. We don't need Doom VR. We don't just need the same Doom game in VR. We need a moment like Tomb Raider. We need to push VR forward. We don't need to drag it down. Bethesda, just figure your shit out. Seriously. Toot toot. All right, now here's a story I can feel positive about, and I'm really happy because it involves Xbox, especially because I was kind of hard on Xbox last week. Hard on Xbox? I shouldn't have said that. But it's been announced that the upcoming Rare-developed title, Sea of Thieves, will be crossplay between Xbox One and PC, meaning both player bases will be able to interact and play together, which is super neat. For those unfamiliar, Sea of Thieves is a first-person multiplayer pirate game where a gang of swashbucklers will work together to hunt for treasure and engage in naval battles, complete with cannonballs and treasure and fighting skeletons. It looks fun, even though no release date has been given yet. Now, no joke, this is one of my most anticipated games of the year, and I'm really hyped for it. And one of the cool things about this is that, the Xbox One fan base, even though they are really high when it comes to engagement, they're smaller than the PlayStation 4. Like, there's not as many Xbox One players as there are on PlayStation 4. So in the back of my mind, I was a little nervous that there wouldn't be enough players to support it in the long run. But now that they're combining PC and Xbox One, that's awesome. That means it's all going to be coming together. Because like I said, Sea of Thieves, it's kind of unconventional. I'm not even into pirate stuff, and I'm looking at this game going, yeah, that looks awesome. I want to be the guy that's in charge of this sail while someone else is manning that cannon. It just sounds cool. But yes, I can't wait. Sea of Thieves looks really good. Can't wait. Toot toot. And finally, before we go into the games of the week, Microsoft has announced that the Xbox Live Games with Gold for the month of September. On September 1st, the Xbox One launch title, Forza Motorsport 5, will be free for the next 30 days. Forza 5, of course, is a racing simulator that was received pretty well back in 2013, though it was criticized for its use of microtransactions, which I believe have been resolved in an update back in 2014, so, pretty beefy game. Now, between September 16th and October 15th, Oxenfree will be available on the Xbox One. Oxenfree is a supernatural adventure game which received high praises when it was launched back in January of last year. So another good one. Now, moving over to the Xbox 360, we have Hydro Thunder Hurricane, which is a can I still say classic? I don't know. I don't want to just throw that word around. Well, it's a 2010 sequel to the arcade boat racer, and it will be available until September 15th. It is a backwards compatible Xbox 360 game. And finally, Battlefield 3 will be available between September 16th to the 30th. I assume everyone listening knows what Battlefield is. All in all, pretty good month. I was feeling a little bit more confident about it before I realized that Battlefield 3's online base is going to be slim to none, and it's also the 360 version of the game, which, if I remember correctly, performed at like 40 frames per second. It wasn't great. And even if this does give a bolster to new players, I don't think they're going to be sticking around for long. But Forza 5 is a beefy racing sim game, and it'll get you all set up for Forza 7, which is great. But of course, if the racing in Forza is too serious for you, you can just go off and race boats if you want to. You probably do. Toot toot. Now let's move on to the games coming out this week, and let me tell you, this is the kickoff of the fall season. Let me give you some advice. Breathe. Pick your game. Don't look back. There's going to be a crap ton of things coming out over the next 3 months. So just see what interests you, or wait for a review, pick up a game, and stick with it. Don't have that whole fear of missing out. It's going to be okay. Games go on sale later on. You'll pick it up later. Don't worry. But here we go. On Tuesday, Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle is launching on the Nintendo Switch. Everybody's Golf is launching on the PlayStation 4. Windjammers is launching on the Vita and PlayStation 4. Surf World Series is going to be on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC. I know everybody's anticipating Surf World Series. Dead Alliance is going to be on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC. Yakuza Kiwami is going to be on the PlayStation 4. That's going to be a good game. I think that's going to be a good game. I'm just saying, I really like Yakuza. XCOM 2 War of the Chosen is going to be on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. The Coma Recruit. Oh no, the Coma Recut will be out on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Warriors All-Stars is going to be on the PlayStation 4 and PC. Culticept Revolt is going to be on the Nintendo 3DS, which I think sold really well in Japan. Killing Floor 2 is going to be out on the Xbox One. I played that on the PS4. It's not very good. Don't bother with Killing Floor 2. Pillars of Eternity Complete Edition is going to be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Resident Evil Revelations is going to be on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Redoubt is going to be on the Nintendo Switch. Sonic Mania is going to be out on the PC, and Absolver is going to be available on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. That is just Tuesday, by the way. On Wednesday, we have X Morph Defense, which is going to be on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Ys 7 is going to be on the PC. Sunless Sky is also going to be out on the PC. And then on Thursday, yes, we're not done yet, the last day of June is going to be on the PlayStation 4 and PC. You dummies, you're releasing the game on the last day of August, and you're calling it the last day of June. Think it through, Dumbos. Life is Strange Before the Storm is going to be on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Azura Striker Gunvolt Striker Pack is going to be on the Nintendo Switch. Those were really good games on the 3DS. You might want to take a look at those. And on Friday, Xena is going to be out on the PC. Beep, beep. That's going to do it for the Hype Train. Thank you, Hype Train. Good God, that's a lot of games coming out this week. So like I said, breathe, relax, zen. Maybe even go and play some old games. You don't have to play new games. Video games are always going to be there. I mean, you will die eventually, so you have a finite amount of time and you will not be able to experience everything. But what I'm saying is, I fucked it up, didn't I? Sorry about that. What I mean to say is, take your time and enjoy the games, all right? In fact, if you're feeling a little stressed out, we can step outside, get a little fresh air, you know? I know a place that's always warm with the glow of cold, hard cash. That's right, it's time for The Chart Park, the land where money grows on trees. Yes, the Chart Park. This is the part of the show we tell about the legal, business, and financial news in the video game industry. Like I always say, actually I never say this, but it's true. The hype train is the what, the Chart Park is the why, because business fuels that industry. Obviously. No shit. Whatever. We don't have as many stories as usual on the Chart Park, but what we do have here is extremely important news. See, last week, Sunday, the Xbox One X finally went on sale for pre-order for $500. And as of the time of this recording, it is already sold out at major retailers such as Best Buy, Walmart, GameStop, and Amazon. Vice President of Marketing Mike Nicholas addressed the news on the official Xbox blog known as the Xbox Wire. Here's what he had to say. Quote, within just a few days, we saw record-setting sellout times and are currently sold out in many countries around the world. You, our biggest fans, have pre-ordered more Xbox One X Project Scorpio Edition consoles in the first 5 days than any Xbox ever. End quote. Of course, the Xbox One X is a new and improved version of the original Xbox One, which has 12 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM and a new 8-core CPU to enhance select titles with improved visuals and resolution of 4K. It also features a 4K Blu-ray player, amongst other improvements. One side note, Microsoft just announced that they're discontinuing the original Xbox One, which shouldn't come as a major surprise because Sony did the same thing when the PlayStation Pro and Slim launched. They got rid of the original PlayStation 4. Now, you might expect me to go on about how this is a huge success for Xbox. And in some ways it is, because like I said when the Nintendo Switch was sold out during a pre-order time, good news. If it didn't sell out, that would be really, really bad. But just like I said with the Nintendo Switch, pre-orders for a console don't generally mean long-term success. And before we go any further, I should say that, yeah, I want to own an Xbox One X. Hell yeah, I do. I'm not going to bother with it until maybe January, just like I did with the PlayStation 4 Pro, because most games don't really take advantage of it until later on, even though, of course, there are a number of enhanced titles, blah, blah, blah. Not for me. Not yet. I'll wait for January. But I want to succeed. I want everyone in the industry to succeed. But there are a few clues that we have right now to see what this generally means for Xbox. We're going to be talking about the GameStop quarterly report in just a moment, but that specifically highlights the Xbox One console sales as lagging. So over at GameStop, the Xbox One sales for consoles and for games have been down a little bit compared to the last year. Now, some of that is likely due to the reveal of the Xbox One X. Why bother buying, the old console when you know a better version is going to be out in like a few months? But it's worth mentioning that GameStop also said, quote, we just started taking pre-orders for the Xbox One X this week, and while it's still early, we are pleased with the initial response to this powerful new console, end quote. They say that about every console, but I'll take their word for it. Also on Amazon, it's worth pointing out that the Xbox One X has quickly moved past the PlayStation 4 Pro on the list of 2017 video game bestsellers. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Xbox One X has already, just through pre-orders alone, has sold more units than the PlayStation Pro did all year. So starting from January 1st to today, all of those sales of the PlayStation 4 Pro on Amazon, the Xbox One X beat it in just under a week, which is really impressive. For the record, the Xbox One X is at number 52 for 2017 on Amazon, while the PlayStation 4 Pro stands at 90, and the Nintendo Switch hovers in the top 20. It keeps moving around a little bit, especially because they have two different packages. There's two different versions of the Switch, which one of them has different colored Joy-Cons. That said, the top 10 is mostly packed with Switch exclusive games and PlayStation Network cards and Horizon Zero Dawn. So those are the best-selling things of 2017 so far. Still, these are really promising signs for the Xbox One X. But you really never know how a console is doing until a year after its release, which is why I refuse to keep, whenever it comes to Nintendo Switch, I'm like, yeah, it's doing well. We'll see where it goes. Once they meet demand, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, let's go to the next story because we do have the fiscal report from GameStop representing the past quarter that ended on July 29th. Now, despite the lagging sales of the Xbox One and the slight dip in PlayStation 4 overall hardware, the hardware sales for GameStop for the quarter were up 14.8% year on year. It's also worth mentioning that they were the number one retailer for the Nintendo Switch hardware, which is kind of good. So if you're a retailer You have to be really grateful for the Nintendo Switch. We are 4 years into the current generation, and sales are bound to slow down right now, and that's not to say that the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4 aren't popular systems. It's just that they're edging closer to a saturation point. Everyone that wants one probably has one, you know? Now we're getting to the point where it's going to be those people that were holding out for a price drop or something. But unfortunately for GameStop, this did little to bolster the sale of new software, which dropped by 3.4%. More concerning were their lucrative pre-owned game sales, which are down 7.5% for the quarter. Now, whenever I say down or up, we are comparing it to the same quarter, the same period as last year. So it's down 7.5% for pre-owned games. That's really bad. And real quick, I do want to point out that this isn't a comment on the Switch or any console, really. I know GameStop is trying to spin this news as, oh, the Xbox One sales are down, that's why our pre-owned game sales are down. But I don't believe it could just be the Xbox One. If you ask me, this just kind of shows the increased popularity of digital sales. Just a guess. Speaking of which, digital sales for GameStop reached $46.5 million. That's a rise of 28.1%. So you can see it right there. Now, all of that is revenue, and I'm honestly not sure how much profit GameStop makes from that. From what I understand, it's mostly sales of season passes and DLCs, but I have no idea how much the publishers give GameStop for selling that in-store or online. I don't know. Presumably something, right? Well, collectibles also continue to see growth, totaling $122.5 million. That's up 36.1% compared to the same period last year. So if you've ever wondered why GameStop keeps investing in ThinkGeek and just bringing in all these weird dolls into GameStop, that's why. They make a lot of money. Even though a lot of those dolls are those Funko Pop dolls that make me fucking sick because they're stupid dolls. They're stupid dolls. You painted your Funko Pop doll red and now it's a Hellboy doll? No, it's just a red Funko Pop doll. This has no personality. Anyway, altogether, the quarter brought in $1.69 billion in revenue, which is up 3.4%. And speaking of future sales, GameStop highlighted the potential. See, I keep saying GameStop very clearly because I almost say GameSpot every single time because I've been thinking about GameSpot and GameStop a lot lately. I was just wondering who was the holdout on that? Who was like, nope, we're not changing? I don't know. But anyway, GameStop highlighted the potential of Nintendo Switch sales, saying, quote, "We continue to see strong demand for the Nintendo Switch and sell out our inventory in a matter of days of being available. We believe this trend will continue through the holiday season," end quote. So let's wrap this up. Hardware, collectibles, and digital sales are up. New and pre-ordered game sales are down. That seems weird. You're selling hardware, but you're not selling games? And you're blaming the Xbox? You know what you can download? Video games. You know what you can't download? Collectibles, hardware, and those awful Funko Pop dolls. And let's remember, Splatoon 2 was the best-selling game of July, and clearly people are going to GameStop to buy the Nintendo Switch. It was the #1 retail for the Nintendo Switch. So why are their sales down when we have this brand new console? Like, the Wii U wasn't doing all that well last year. How can you be down? I don't know. I keep thinking it's digital sales. It has to be digital sales. And for the record, I'm not saying digital sales are better or anything. I always go for physical games, but it's clear to see where this is going. Anyway, moving on. That's how one retailer handled the quarter. But what about Game? This is a subject that I really like covering. In case you don't know, Game is a long-running video game franchise store that's fallen on hard times. It is located in Europe. It's nowhere in America at all, and it has fallen on hard times for years. It's amazing that they're still open. Like, their stock right now is trading at 38 pence per share, and it takes 100 pence to make a pound. Now, that sounds bad already, but imagine this. Their stock price has dropped nearly 90% over the past 2.5 years. Like, you can go and see when their stock was worth like £3.50, somewhere around there, and then it just plummets. And there was even a point where Game was like shut down, and then they got saved. It's crazy. And they even put out a fresh profit warning 2 months ago stating that their full year profits would be, quote, substantially below expectations, end quote. How are they still alive? Well, here's how everything shook out for the quarter. it was kind of good. General sales were up 6.8% year on year. Group sales were mostly flat, up 0.1% year on year. Now, gross transaction value for the period reached £325.4 million. That totals £891.7 million for the year so far, which is up 2.3%. The CEO of Game, Martin Gibbs, he gave an optimistic viewpoint, stating, quote, "We've been encouraged by the recent growth in both the UK and Spanish markets overall, and we expect that this momentum will continue into peak trading, driven by continued consumer demand for Xbox and Nintendo Switch, and a strong lineup of new games," end quote. Game has actually opened 18 new esport environments they are calling Belong Arenas, which is their latest endeavor. Anyway, reading all of this news, it's pretty clear Game isn't long for this world, at least in its current incarnation. I mean, it is a high-end video game retailer. Who needs that? But this bit about esports arena, that has me really interested. See, the idea of having 18 esports locations, that doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that makes any sense whatsoever, because even though esports are really popular, they don't need physical representation outside of major events. And especially in the UK, you know, I don't see it. The population, why do they need 18 of those? We don't even have 18 of those in America. But I wouldn't be surprised if people are using these Belong Arenas as some sort of arcade or internet cafe. See, this is a market that I've been looking at for a very long time, but for some reason, no one's going for it here in the West, or at least here in America. They're obviously doing it in the UK. Think about it. Video games are just about playing games, and playing in a group environment is fun, but it's hard to find other people with similar shared interests. Where do you go if you want to hang out with people that like video games and play together? It's not really possible. Think about it for a moment. Sports bars, they've always been popular because they've allowed a culture to thrive. People know where to go to watch a game and chat with someone about the game. You see people belly up at the bar and you know, just commentate. But what about video games? How much of the internet is made up of people talking to complete strangers about video games? But how often do you, listener or viewer, talk with complete strangers in real life about video games? People do it all the time with sports, not games? That seems odd. Now, maybe it's because I've gone to a lot of those midnight events, you know, where they launch a brand new game or a console, but I've always noticed how social those things become before the doors open. People are talking to people that they've never met before and acting like they've known each other for years because they have that similar interest. So if Game provides an environment where people can have a modern day LAN party, I think it could be a huge hit, so long as it's marketed in the right way that encourages an inclusive type of behavior. But that's just my opinion. We don't have arcades, we don't have internet cafes. There's no social hub for video games, and I think esports arenas, or whatever they want to call it, a place where you could show up one day, play a couple of matches of Call of Duty, play some Tekken 7, whatever it may be, and get to know some people, I think that's positive. And of course, charge them at the door and have snacks there. Make that dollar. Just saying, I think it'd be a good idea. Anyway, moving on to the next story. It feels like only 4 months ago that we had a weekly slew of VR stories. Oh wait, it only was 4 months ago. It's been a slow period for VR. And perhaps that's why HTC Vive, nope, the company is called HTC, they've officially dropped the price of their Vive headset from $800 to $600. The bundle also includes 2 tracking cameras, a pair of motion controllers, as well as software called Google Tilt Brush, which I believe is the art tool, Everest VR, which, no wait, maybe that's the art tool, and Richie's Plank Experience, which I have no idea what that is. Sorry, I didn't keep up with that one. As well as 1 month free access to Vive Port subscription. And that's basically the whole story right there, but it's worth comparing where we are right now when it comes to VR prices. Right now, the Oculus is $400, but that's part of a summer sales event. It's going to be going back to up to $500 in a couple of weeks, I want to say. And the PlayStation VR right now, the bundle with the Move controllers and the camera and the headset, that's $500 right now. You can get the headset on its own for $400. And actually, you can get the bundle for cheaper than $500. There's a bunch of deals going on, but there's no official price cut because, you know, the PlayStation VR is actually doing really well. They don't need to cut the price. And I don't really think that that's going to change. I think PlayStation VR is still going to be the biggest success for the time being, because even if the other headsets like Vive and like Oculus get cheaper, they still require a fairly powerful PC to run, which is far more expensive than a $300 PlayStation 4. Think about it, you could just get a PS4 Slim and you can have VR. Woo. Well, I mean, obviously you have to buy the headset too. But if you've got the PC to pull it off, I think the Vive is the absolute obvious choice. Like, sure, Oculus is a good product for what it is, and I'm not, like, if you own an Oculus, good for you. It's fine. It is. It really, really is. But for $100 more with the Vive, you get room scale VR, and once you've experienced that, it is hard to go back. Seriously, the Vive is far and away the best. So a very smart move by HTC. $600, it's a good deal, even though the software isn't quite there yet. Anyway, moving on, here's one of the most curious stories of the year. Developer Acid Wizard Studios has uploaded their week-old title Darkwood to the Pirate Bay, a torrent website that's used for many different reasons, but as the name implies, is primarily known for piracy. So why exactly did Acid Wizards cut into their own profits? Well, developer, and I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, Message Gorney. He's from someplace in Europe that I don't know. He explained the reasoning behind the team's choice to put it on Pirate Bay. Here's what he said, quote, "If you don't have the money and want to play the game, we have a safe torrent on the Pirate Bay of the latest version of Darkwood 1.0 Hotfix 3. It's completely DRM free. There's no catch, there's no added pirate hats for characters or anything like that. We just have one request. If you like Darkwood and want us to continue making games, consider buying it in the future. Maybe on sale through Steam, Good Old Games, or Humble Store," end quote. You gotta give them credit here. They're practicing what they're preaching, even if I don't really agree with what they're practicing. See, I've known plenty of pirates over the years, and they don't buy things. They never buy things. They are loyal to pirate sites more than they are to the actual artists. I know that might offend some people, but that is what I've seen. They will find illegal streams, they will find copied files, they never move up to buy anything because they're like, well, you know, they have their own moral reasons, whatever. In fact, I'm not trying to have any sort of moral judgment. I'm just saying exactly what I've experienced firsthand, what I've seen. You know, without contributing any sort of money to developers or publishers or anything, I wouldn't promote this behavior because they're not helping the industry. And there's plenty of free entertainment out there in the world right now. You can have plenty of free-to-play games. Right now, go play some free-to-play games. Go to the library. You can rent out games for free, for absolutely free. Now, obviously, this guy is from Europe, so maybe the library doesn't have video games there, but okay, fine. There's plenty of free-to-play games. They're out there. You don't need to take one that actually costs money, but if these guys feel that this is the right way to go, more power to them, and I hope I'm wrong. I really do. Moving on, bouncing back to Xbox news, during the Gamescom event in Germany last week, Bluehole, the developers for the popular PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, announced that they will be partnering with Microsoft for the Xbox One port of PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds. Microsoft will publish the game when it launches sometime this year. Yes, really, this year. That's what they're saying. Who knows? While Microsoft is not directly involved in the development, this deal will establish a closer relationship between Bluehole and Xbox. Now, I've seen some people citing Battlegrounds as an Xbox One exclusive because Microsoft is publishing it, and I hate to break it to you, but that's probably not going to be the case. See, Microsoft has published lots of games that end up being on other consoles. Just look at Portal. Yes, the original Portal on Xbox 360, published by Microsoft. True story. True story. What about the very first Mass Effect? The very first Mass Effect, published by Microsoft. You can play it on the PlayStation 3 right now. Not to mention the obvious example of Minecraft, which is being published by Microsoft on other platforms, like the Nintendo Switch just a couple of months ago. But this does mean that Microsoft and Bluehole will be working together, and who knows where that could lead. But as Phil Spencer has repeatedly stated, he's not interested in preventing content coming to other consoles. And if you need an example of that, let's move on to our next story. We have our latest development in the long-running saga of Xbox and PlayStation 4 crossplay. For the past couple of years, starting with Rocket League, there's been increased pressure on Sony to allow PlayStation Network to connect to other platforms. Well, this past week we saw a promising development when Aaron Greensburg, the Microsoft marketing manager, told Game Reactor, which as I've said many times is the best reactor to games. Here's what he said, quote, "We're talking to Sony. We do partner with them on Minecraft, and of course we would like to enable them to be part of that. One community to unite gamers. So we're talking to them, and we're hoping that we'll be supportive of it." Of course, Sony has been repeatedly dismissive of that option, as recently as June when Sony's Jim Ryan stated, quote, "We have a contract with the people who go online with us, and then that we look after them they are with the PlayStation curated universe, exposing what in many cases are children to external influences and have no ability to manage or look after, and is something that we have to think about very carefully, end quote. In other words, he said, think about the children. That's why we can't connect to Xbox Live, which is bullshit. So to be clear, the discussions between Microsoft and Sony could just result in a single title being merged together, most likely Minecraft. This does not mean that we're going to be playing Call of Duty together all in one player base. But, you know, beyond that, beyond Sony, there's no one really standing in the way of this. I know that they said, oh, we're working with developers and they would never allow this. I don't really buy into that. I don't know of any developer that wouldn't want their customers to play together, because that only increases engagement, and when you increase engagement, that creates retention, and retention pushes for DLC and microtransaction sales. But it's not like Sony is completely illogical here. They have the lead in console sales, and one of their biggest selling points is that they have a larger install base. So whenever I buy a game that is multiplayer only or exclusively, I usually go with the PlayStation 4 version, because I assume it'll be easier to connect with the game. Now, if it was crossplay, I might buy more Xbox One games, and I doubt Sony would like that. But as time goes on and word spreads, it's obvious that the only holdouts to all of this are Sony, which isn't great publicity for Sony. Heck, even the Rocket League guys said that they could get this working in a matter of hours if they got the go-ahead. Just, they have to flip a switch. Seriously, they could do it today. So I wouldn't expect this anytime soon, but I would say this is probably just going to be Minecraft. But I would love it if the consoles could connect. And lastly, before we move on to the charts, we have one last story, and it's a follow-up to one of last year's biggest stories. Mark Laidlaw, I believe was his name, the former Valve employee who helped pen the story for Half-Life and Half-Life 2, he has published a short story on his blog, which shouldn't come as a surprise because he's written plenty of books over the past 30 years and short stories. But what's odd about this one is it's called Episode 3. Episode 3. That sounds a lot like Episode 3. Anyway, the protagonist in the story is named Gertie Fredmont. It's a woman who acts and sounds a lot like Gordon Freeman. Huh. Could it be the intended ending of the Half-Life saga? Well, Laidlaw isn't directly stating. He was responding to fans on Twitter who immediately blew up his account. And here's what he said, quote, like most things in the Half-Life series, answers are developed strictly as needed. So no, I had no fixed ideas about this, just planting seeds. At this point, I'm operating strictly in a fan capacity, end quote. So considering it might have potential spoilers, I'm not going to recap the story here. But it's now been 10 years since the release of Half-Life 2 Episode 2, so if you need closure, just Google it. It's really easy to find. Now let's get onto the charts. We have the 10 best-selling games in the UK for the past week, starting off at number 10 with Forza Horizon 3. Hard to believe, Forza Horizon 3, it's almost been a year. It's still in the top 10. Number 9 was Splatoon 2. Number 8 was Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. Number 7 was Dishonored 2. Number 6 was Doom. Number 5 was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Number 4 was Agents of Mayhem, which is the debut week for it. Number 3 was Fallout 4. Number 2 was Grand Theft Auto 5. And number 1 is the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, because of course it is. Now, I'm really curious to see if Crash Bandicoot sticks around, because we have big games coming out in the next couple of weeks. If it does, it has to be one of the best-selling games of the year. Seriously. But let's go to the Cursed Land of Bullet Trains, known as Japan, and find one of the 10 best-selling games over there. Number 10 was The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. Number 9 was Animal Crossing New Leaf Amiibo Plus on the 3DS. Number 8 was Hey Pikmin on the 3DS. Number 7 was ARMS on the Nintendo Switch. Number 6 was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Nintendo Switch. Number 5 was Dragon Quest X all in one package on the PlayStation 4. It's like a Game of the Year version of the MMO. Number 4 was The Snack World Treasures on the 3DS, which is down from number 2. It was like the second best selling game in Japan last week. Number 3 is Splatoon 2 on the Nintendo Switch. Number 2 is Dragon Quest XI Echoes of the Elusive Age on the PlayStation 4. Number 1 is Dragon Quest XI Echoes of the Elusive Age on the 3DS, because of course it is. Those games are selling amazingly well just in Japan all by themselves. But what were the best-selling consoles over in Japan? Well, I am glad you asked, because I have the numbers right here. Starting off with the PlayStation 4 with 28,779, Nintendo Switch with 22,277, the new 3DS LL with 16,083, new 2DS LL with 14,939, PlayStation 4 Pro with 5,909. Look at that, from the new 2DS to the PlayStation 4 Pro, a drop of nearly 10,000. That's crazy. PlayStation Vita with 5,177, 2DS with 2,999, They were just one away from selling 3,000. New 3DS with 575, Wii U with 151, PlayStation 3 with 110, and in last place, for the 5th week in a row, it's the Xbox One with 100. A solid 100. Pretty good. And if you're wondering why I don't mention how many weeks in a row a particular console has been in number 1, it's because it actually fluctuates pretty regularly between the 3DS, Switch, and PlayStation 4. But last place doesn't. It's usually just the Xbox One. But that's going to have to do it for the Chart Park, the land where money grows on trees. We've come to the final segment of the show. This is the part of the show we take a look back 10 years ago and beyond to find out if there's anything worth talking about, and there usually is. It's a little something we like to call Strong History. This week there are so many games, we're just going to have to get right to it and just address them point by point. Seriously, so many games. We're reaching the fall season. 10 years ago, on the PlayStation 3, Warhawk was released. Now, this was the follow-up to the PlayStation 1 original Warhawk, but now it is a massively online war game where you can fly planes, drive tanks, and run around and shoot people. It still has a cult following to this day. However, it's more remembered for its disastrous E3 2006 demo that showed the super rushed motion controls of the 6-axis controller where someone was just flinging their ship around. Look it up, it's really funny. Whatever. Also 10 years ago, on Nintendo Wii, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Yes, it's really been 10 years since the last Metroid Prime game. Unless you count Federation Force. But the main difference from this and its predecessors was, of course, it was on the Wii, so it had the motion controls. And it was the first Metroid game on the Wii. But it wasn't the last, because there was other M. 11 years ago, on the Xbox 360, Saints Row was released. Now remember, Saints Row, an Xbox 360 exclusive. If you don't count PC. How crazy is that? The original Saints Row. Now, if you're only familiar with the more meme-heavy sequels, it might come as a surprise that Saints Row launched as a pretty blatant ripoff of Grand Theft Auto. Even the sense of humor was a ripoff of Vice City and San Andreas. But thankfully, Saints Row figured out its own identity as it went on. But it could have been very different, because when they were developing Saints Row, it was originally titled Bling Bling. That would have been a bit dated. Also, that same year, Star Fox Command was launched on the Nintendo DS. Now, this is the forgotten Star Fox game, and for good reason. It feels like a tech demo for touchscreens more than a full-fledged game. See, you control Star Fox and the R-Wing using the DS stylus, and it's not great, and most of the stages are just time trials. I'm not going to say it's Superman 64 bad, but it borrows a lot of ideas for Superman 64. Anyway, 13 years ago, on the Xbox, the Guy game was released. So there was a time when sex actually sold things, like actually sold video games. This was a time before the majority of the people had internet porn. I don't know how that's possible, but it is, because enough people bought the Guy game, which was a game that was centered around an event that was filmed at a beach, like real video filmed at events where young women were interviewed and asked questions. And if they got the answers incorrectly, if they didn't get the answers, if they answered incorrectly, they had to take off their tops. So what exactly did the players do? Well, they played really bad mini games, and then they would bet to see if the girls would get the answers right. Now, if the girls didn't, they had to take off their tops, but their breasts would be blurred out. But eventually, you could see the whole enchilada. The only problem was, one of the girls turned out to be 17. So the game was removed from store shelves. Oops. 14 years ago, on the PlayStation 2, Soul Calibur 2 was released. It was also launched on the GameCube and the original Xbox. This game was huge when it came out in 2003. The first Soul Calibur, not to be confused with Soul Edge, was one of the best games on the Dreamcast. But this was like the franchise going multi-platform, which made it even better, and also featured the brand new 8-way controls, which is still fairly rare in fighting games. I don't even think they have that in Tekken, do they? I don't know. Now, each version of Soul Calibur 2 was pretty much identical, but there was one exclusive character per platform. On the PlayStation 2, you got Hayashi Mishimura from Tekken. Link appeared on the GameCube. Yes, Link from The Legend of Zelda. He was totally overpowered. He could throw bombs. What the fuck? And Spawn, yes, Spawn, the character from the comic books, he was on the Xbox. Now, for my money, the Xbox version was the best. It had the sharpest visuals with 480p. It supported 720p, but it was in standard definition. So there were like black bars, or as I like to call it, whatever, Never mind. But on the Xbox, the controller is way better than the GameCube. Seriously, try fighting with kidney-shaping buttons. No, thank you. 15 years ago, on the PC, Mafia was released. Now, this is one heck of a decisive game. On one hand, it was super cool to see an open-world game that took place in the 30s, but the only problem was it was released a year after Grand Theft Auto 3, and it didn't play nearly as well, and the police would chase after you for any sort of minor crimes like bumping into another car or going through a red light. It wasn't great, but it was the start of a great franchise. 17 years ago on the PlayStation, Spider-Man was released. Now, not to be confused with any of the movie-based game, this Spider-Man was all about the comic book universe, which meant that Spider-Man had limited web cartridges and a huge established roster of, well, bad guys. But my personal favorite element to this game were all of the cheat codes, where you could unlock Spider-Man's costumes for over the years. I'm talking about Scarlet Spider, Spider-Man 2099, the symbiote suit, obviously, and even Captain Universe. Now let's hope that the brand new Insomniac game leans a little more heavy into the comic book lore. I'm just hoping so. Also that same year, Pokemon Puzzle Challenge was released on the Nintendo 64 and Game Boy Color. Now, I have nothing to say here. I just put it in here because I assume someone listening will care. 18 years ago, on the PlayStation, Dino Crisis was released. Now, we just talked about this game a couple of weeks ago, so we'll skim past it. But basically, it was Resident Evil, but with dinosaurs, which is a super cool concept. Well, they followed it up with a more action-centric sequel only a year later, which is a crazy fast turnaround. So you got Dino Crisis 1, the Dino Crisis 2, all in around a year. But Dino Crisis 3 is what killed the franchise. See, it was an original Xbox exclusive that took place in the future, where the dinosaurs were in space. Moving on. Also that same year, Gauntlet Legends was out on the Nintendo 64. Here's another game that I don't really care about. I'm only putting it in here because I assume someone else does. Also that same year, hard to believe, but the exact same year, Suikoden 2 was released on the PlayStation. Now, for the most part, Konami is remembered as an action developer because they released games like Castlevania, Contra, and Metal Gear. But they also made quite a few RPGs back in the day, with Suikoden 2 being one of the most beloved. Now, Suikoden 2, it's got a ton of characters. It's got a heavily strategic system where you can change the scenarios around using a rune. It's complicated, but you definitely want to check it out. It is available on the PlayStation Network for the PlayStation 3 and the Vita and the PS3. And, you know, it didn't sell that well when it was released, and that's probably because it used sprites rather than polygons, but it's because of that art style that it holds up remarkably well. So go take a look at it. Suikoden 2, awesome game. Also that same year, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater launched on the original PlayStation. Now here's a fun tidbit. Without Bruce Willis, there would be no Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That might sound completely insane, but it's true. See, following the success of MDK, developer Neversoft attempted to create the next big blockbuster, a top-down 3D shooter starring Bruce Willis. It was called Apocalypse, and it lived up to the name because it was doomed at retail. Nobody bought Apocalypse. It's not a very good game. I played it. It's no good. But it does have Bruce Willis in it, if you're into that. So Neversoft didn't have much money left over to develop that skateboarding game they were supposed to be working on. So to save money, they had to use the exact same engine that they used on Apocalypse, which turned out to be perfect because Tony Hawk's Pro Skater became a huge hit, selling over 5 million copies on the PlayStation 1 alone, making it one of the best-selling PS1 games ever. And it's all thanks to Bruce Willis's crappy game. Yeah. 19 years ago, on the Nintendo 64, Bomberman Hero was released on the Nintendo 64, that's right. This is not a great game, but you absolutely need to listen to the soundtrack. Look up Bomberman Hero. Great soundtrack. Over on the PlayStation, the exact same year, Mega Man Legends was released. Now, the only reason I'm putting in Mega Man Legends isn't because it was a great game or anything, but I'm putting it in here because it had a lock-on camera for combat a year before Ocarina of Time was released on the Nintendo 64. Just saying, Nintendo didn't invent everything. You can make Mega Man Legends for your lock-on camera, and even then, that's kind of a dubious claim because there were games like Burning Rangers, whatever. But yes, please stop claiming that the lock-on camera was invented by the Ocarina of Time. It popularized it, for sure, though. Now, 20 years ago, on the original PlayStation, Final Fantasy VII was released, one of the greatest games of all time. This was the very first 3D Final Fantasy game. Of course, this means that the game's visuals don't hold up to some people, but I personally love the way this game looks, even today, because the different kinds of cutscenes and in-game models, like every 5 seconds, the characters look different, and that can be really confusing. But to me, it creates this sort of collage of different art styles, which I really appreciate. But if you're really interested in the history of Final Fantasy VII, please go Google Polygon's Oral History of Final Fantasy VII. It's an amazing read. They have more tidbits than I can cover here. 21 years ago on the PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot was released, which of course this game has already been talked to death because of the brand new Crash Insane trilogy. But I'll say this much, when Naughty Dog were developing the game, they had a code name for it called Sonic's Ass, because you'd be looking at the ass, because they're running forward. Makes sense. Also that same year, in 1996, Die Hard Trilogy was released on the PlayStation. Die Hard Trilogy has to be one of the best licensed games of all time. See, each entry in the trilogy had its own genre. The first game took place in the first movie, and it was a top-down shooter with Bruce Willis. Where have I heard that before? Weird. Anyway, the second was a light gun shooter that took place in Die Hard 2 in the airport, and the third was like this crazy taxi-style arcade game, which was really fun because you would jump between cars. But I'll always remember this game because it had a really fun quit screen. You know when you select, you press start and you try and quit out of a game? The options were yes, no, or not sure. And then you could select ask a friend, and then it would say get a life. It was funny. 22 years ago on the personal computer, Command & Conquer was released. Now, this is one of the most important games of all time because Westwood Studios took all of the concepts it designed in Dune 2, which of course is based off of Dune, and then they applied it to their own IP, something that they owned and could develop. Essentially, this created the PC real-time strategy game, and it doesn't seem that important, maybe, in today's day and age, but where would Blizzard be without Warcraft and StarCraft? Because Command & Conquer and Dune 2 were real-time strategy games. And yes, I know Warcraft, the very first one, was released a year before Command & Conquer, but Dune 2 was released years before that. And of course, Herzog Zwei was released on the Sega Genesis back in 1989. But the point is that Westwood Studios, they contributed a lot, and they often get overlooked. Also that same year, Tekken 2 was released on the PlayStation. Now, the director of this game, his name is Shichi Ishii. We'll go with that. I'm not trying to pronounce his name, but Ishii, he directed the first game, they directed the second game. But here's where it gets interesting. He actually left and then worked on Tobal No. 1, Guys, and then The Bouncer. The guy who directed Tekken 2 directed The Bouncer. I didn't know that, and it blew my mind. Anyway, 23 years ago, on the Super Nintendo in Japan, Live Alive was released, one of the best RPGs that never came to America. We're going to close out the show with a song from Live Alive, so stay tuned for that. Also, 28 years ago, the TurboGrafx 16 was released. This is one of the most underrated consoles of all time. If you love top-down shooters, you absolutely have to play this this console. The library is fantastic. I love Bonk. I love Bonk's Revenge. Actually, I love Bonk's Revenge. I don't like Bonk's Adventure. I like Bonk's Revenge. Super cool, super fun. 16-bit console, wink wink. Really, it was more like an 8-bit console. I can't really do it justice in this segment, but if you want to have a laugh, go and look up the infomercial that they made for this console. It's ridiculous. You can find it on YouTube. 30 years ago this week, Street Fighter, the original Street Fighter, was launched in arcades in Japan. Now, this is nowhere near as important as its sequel, but the original Street Fighter, it was important. It's not the first fighting game, as it's often called. That's completely untrue. But here's an interesting tidbit about the original Street Fighter. It had 2 buttons, one for punch and one for kick, instead of the 6 buttons that we see in all the other arcade games. And the reason being is that it had pressure-sensitive buttons, so the harder you hit the buttons, the harder the attack would be. But that just resulted in a bunch of buttons getting broken. And then Capcom had to design the 6-button interface. So you can thank Street Fighter for getting the ball rolling and popularizing that control scheme. Good for them. And lastly, 31 years ago, I Am Teacher Super Mario No Sweater was released on the NES. I'm only going to explain this. I'm only going to explain this once. All right? So listen up. This was released in Japan, and this was a game where you designed a sweater, and then for a fee, you could order the sweater from Royal Industries. And yes, the sweaters were Mario themed. And yes, this is real. Yes. And that's going to have to do it for Strong History. Man, long show. Feel like the show's getting longer every week. Isn't it crazy, folks? It really is. But because my throat is already going, it is time to close up the show. Please go to youtube.com/videogamesardumb and check out my interview with all these great developers I've been posting lately. That's the important thing. Focus on that. Focus on my reviews because the PRESSURECAST is going away soon. Just saying. Check out my other stuff. You can also see me post a video on Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. That should be going up tomorrow. Tomorrow's Tuesday. Yeah, that'll probably be going up tomorrow. And from there, I don't know, I'll be doing more live streams soon, stuff like that. Just stay tuned. Stay tuned. That's all I ask. But yes, this is the end of the show. Just like it was the end of the sweater era of Nintendo. They haven't made a game where you can make your own sweaters in years. And that's sad. Well, you can still make your own sweaters with the PRESSURECAST. No, you can't. Whatever. What I'm trying to say is the PRESSURECAST is forever. See you guys.